White House officials are reportedly considering extending the pause on student debt payments beyond January 1st, 2023, as courts block President Biden's plan to cancel up to $20,000 in debt per borrower. This news comes after the plan faced another loss on Monday when a federal appeals court panel agreed to a preliminary injunction halting the program. The ruling came from a 3-court panel in the federal appeals court. This just days after a federal judge in Texas blocked the program, saying it, quote, usurped Congress's power to make laws. The Washington Post writes that in August, Biden announced the administration would implement student debt forgiveness while ending a moratorium on student debt payments that began during the pandemic.
So the argument here is that so the people suing, state of Missouri has standing because the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority is a loan servicing state organization that takes in some revenue from
the government
debt.
Hires it to do a job to administer the student debt.
So it is going to, it has plausibly argued that it is harmed by this forgiveness, so it can sue, because that's really the issue. It's trying to establish, or that's right. What legal commentators have said is the main issue is trying to establish, actually have a court case go through to prove you actually have standing, because you have to prove you were harmed by the loan cancellation. Which has been a hard...
My understanding is that actually isn't the strong standing case. Saying basically, if I hire you to clean my house and then I say, never mind, I don't need your services anymore, you can't sue me saying you absolutely have to keep hiring me to clean your house because I had a vested interest in that job. No, the government has contracted people to administer loans that it has issued. If it wants to cancel those loans, forgive those loans, it has the ability to do so.
But that's not quite...
The problem here, my understanding is the stronger standing case is that someone who worked for one of the loan servicing industries has been put forward to argue that they are disadvantaged by the program because they were not eligible for various reasons. So either they didn't qualify because they made too much money or had already paid off their loans. And then that's the standing hook that's allowing this to survive.
I think the argument's closer to you're paying me to clean your house, and then the government it passes or just declares.
No, not the government. The government is the person whose house is getting cleaned. Those are government loans, and that's crucial to
But the government does that, and that harms, and then my service is no longer required, so I can sue. That doesn't mean the law, me being able to sue doesn't mean the action was improper. It just means I'm able to sue because I'm harmed because of it.
Right. I mean, the implication
then they would still judge whether it was legal or constitutional to do what was done. Or you could say it was perfectly legal to harm you. Sorry.
Well, the implication is that the government isn't able to end its own contracts at will, which is not exactly what I would consider to be a conservative libertarian perspective.
If it does it like.
Well, there's nothing illegal about the government deciding to end a contract with
that's what we're...
No, that's not actually in dispute, and why this is part of the
Whether
issue.
President Biden can just declare it is under dispute.
Right. Well, so I want to get to that, because the real issue here isn't really about any of that. The real issue here is that the authority that Biden used to base this on is incorrect authority that makes itself vulnerable to this. So the problem is that Biden has said that he wants to use the HEROES Act, which is a post-9/11 act, to justify his executive authority. So as we've been saying this whole time, Biden does have the executive authority to cancel student debt without an act of Congress.
No, however, I don't concede
However,
that.
executive authority comes from congressional grants. So you have to have some legislative hook to justify the width of your executive action. And there are multiple congressional authorities that one could conceivably have used to do this. Instead of using the big obvious one, the Higher Education Act, which is the authority under which the student loan debt has been postponed, there's been a moratorium for now 2 years, he decided to use the HEROES Act, which is an emergency act which requires there to be an emergency footing, which he argued and his lawyers argued was justified by COVID. Now, not only has Biden said that COVID is over, the Supreme Court has shot down any number of cases on the basis that COVID is over, including very famously all of the mandates. So why would the Biden administration, knowing that the Supreme Court is already hostile to that kind of an argument, base its program on this kind of a faulty case law? Now, I have been blowing the whistle on this for a long time. I talked about it on this show. I talked about it with Jed Sugarman, a professor from Fordham Law, on my own show. And I've talked about it with the leaders of the advocates for debt relief over at the Debt Collective, Astra Taylor and Sparky Abraham. And this was a known. And so to the extent that, we just talked to Rokana and he says that I'm sure this could be fixed, I'm sure this could be changed, it could have been avoided entirely had Biden chosen to use different authority, which is why some people are asking whether or not Joe Biden actually never planned to follow through on this program and simply use it as an inducement for young people to come to the polls.
So some people, including Jed Sugarman, is it? That's his name? Right, believe that. And I think you're right that the Higher Education Act authority for doing this is stronger than the HEROES Act. But since you've brought that up on the show, I've been doing more reading about it, and I can find, including Ilya Somin, who's a legal expert who writes for us at Reason for Volokh Conspiracy. He thinks ultimately the Higher Education Act authority would be, in the end of the day, also problematic because it's a major questions doctrine issue where it's beyond the scope of what that law is really giving the president authority to declare in individual case-by-case basis, not wholesale for lots and lots of people.
Well, if that were the case,
argument.
then Donald Trump would have been improper in starting the student loan moratorium in the first place.
Ilya Somin certainly believes Trump was improper in doing that.
But here we are. So this brings us to the second prong of this, which is that regardless of the authority
Ilya Somin believes everything Trump has ever done is improper.
Well, so. This brings us to the second issue, which is that regardless of whatever whatever authority is used, if Joe Biden had simply canceled the debt outright, just done it without making an application process and means testing it, there would have been no recourse for anyone to try to obstruct the law. Basically,
because there would have been no standing.
No, well, because it would have been a done deal. And the consequences...
Well, it would have invited legal challenges.
Well, sure, but what are you going to do about it? The administrative reality of actually canceling that debt and then going back and trying to put money back on people's balance sheets, it just would not have occurred. And this is another one of the arguments that the strike debt people have been making for the whole time. If you feel like some people are going to get a windfall, if you think that there are some people who don't deserve to have their debt canceled, go ahead and raise taxes and claw back on the back end. But when you create administrative hurdles like this, you give people an opportunity to bring cases in the first instance and get injunctions like the ones that are in place now that prevent the policy from going through.
If they forgive all the debt right now, they won't be able to do a piecemeal forgiveness in the next election, weeks before it, in order to keep Democrats in power.
Exactly, and that's what I think. A lot of liberals push back against me very aggressively, saying a lot of things that frankly violate Twitter's previous laws against harassment. But they seem very, I can take it. It's not a big deal. But I think hit dogs will holler, right? Uh-huh. And I tweeted out that it is very suspicious that a day or 2 days after midterms, suddenly we get this decision the same way that we got the decision right after Cori Bush's protest on the steps of Congress to uphold the eviction moratorium. The Democratic Congress allowed it. They basically gave them permission to do that protest, said, okay, we're going to extend the moratorium, and the next day the Supreme Court struck it down. So there's a pattern emerging, right. And of course I can't prove anything here, but it is very suspicious that Biden, knowing that he could have avoided these challenges. I think
the Supreme Court was waiting to strike that down. I mean, they were...
Well, that the Congress had knowledge that the Supreme Court decision was going to come out that way, so it was okay for them to allow it.
Yeah.
But it's increasingly suspicious for voters who feel increasingly hoodwinked that young voters came out to the polls in record numbers, matching almost the 2018 record numbers, and but for them, Fetterman wouldn't have won. Democrats would not have held the Senate, and the red wave might have actually materialized. And for this kind of bait and switch to have happened, I think a lot of voters are sitting here thinking, well, I'm not actually going to follow through and vote for Democrats until I actually have what they've delivered in my bank account. Voters in Georgia saw this after they were told they were going to get $2,000 checks and student debt cancellation if they came to the polls and voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and won him the Senate in 2020. They also didn't get the voting rights reforms they were promised or the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So at a certain point, voters have to look up and say, are Democrats just lying to us to get us to the polls, bribing us to get us to the polls, inducing us with promises to codify abortion when they turn around, as Barack Obama did, and say, never mind, it's not my priority.
It was wildly effective.
And are they going to keep doing it as long as it keeps working?
Well, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.